The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. But what happens when something defies every sensor, every theory, every rational explanation? Captain Jean-Luc Picard stood on the bridge of the USS Enterprise D, reviewing stellar cartography reports when the alarms began. It was not a red alert, not yet, but the preliminary chirp of sensors detecting an anomaly in their patrol sector near the neutral zone. Lieutenant Commander Data's golden eyes tracked the incoming readings with characteristic precision, his fingers moving across the ops console with mechanical efficiency. "Captain," Data announced, his voice carrying the measured cadence of pure analytical observation. "Transporter malfunction in Cargo Bay 3. Subspace readings are anomalous." Picard set down his PADD. Anomalous was Data's word for impossible. Status: unknown origin signature detected during activation. Dimensional variance in the transport pattern. It appears the malfunction may have created a brief rift in subspace, creating an unintended intersection with our coordinates. Picard rose from his command chair. Medical and security to Cargo Bay 3. Red alert. The Enterprise D hummed with the familiar pulse of yellow alert as he made his way through corridors lined with crew members moving with practiced urgency. The ship was his domain, his responsibility. And now, something from beyond their understanding had crossed its threshold. When Picard entered Cargo Bay 3, the first thing he noticed was the smell: copper, ozone, and something ancient, like old leather and ash. The second thing was the woman on the floor. She lay in a pool of violet-tinged blood, her body twisted at an angle that suggested violence. Her dark hair was matted, her clothes torn, black fabric adorned with symbols that seemed to shift in the cargo bay's lighting. Her skin bore markings, intricate lines and geometric patterns that glowed faintly with blue luminescence. Not tattoos. Not paint. Something else entirely. Dr. Crusher knelt beside her immediately, tricorder in hand, her expression shifting from professional calm to deep concern. "Her biology is..." "Captain, I'm reading dual energy signatures. She's humanoid, but there's something else, an energy matrix integrated with her cellular structure." Picard approached slowly, his diplomatic instincts warring with security protocols. "Is she alive?" "Yes. Barely. Severe lacerations, possible internal hemorrhaging, and these marks on her skin, they're generating low-level radiation. Not harmful at current levels, but unusual." Crusher glanced up. "She needs to get to sickbay now." The woman's eyes snapped open. They were dark brown, nearly black, and filled with the feral awareness of a predator waking in unfamiliar territory. Her hand moved with startling speed, fingers curling into a position Picard recognized as combat-ready, though her grip found only empty air. Security officers tensed, hands moving toward their phasers. "Stand down," Picard ordered, his voice carrying absolute authority. He stepped forward, hands visible and open. "You're safe. We're Starfleet, the United Federation of Planets. You've been injured. Our medical officer is here to help." The woman's gaze tracked him with laser focus, processing, calculating. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse, edged with adrenaline and barely contained violence. "Where am I? What is this place?" "Starship USS Enterprise D," Picard said, maintaining his measured tone. "I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard. What's your name?" "Clary." She tried to sit up, gasped in pain, and fell back. Her hand pressed to her side, and when she pulled it away, fresh blood stained her fingers. "I was hunting. There was a demon, a Shax, it fled through a portal near the Brooklyn Bridge and I followed. The air changed. Everything went wrong." Picard exchanged a glance with Dr. Crusher. "Brooklyn." The woman was speaking of Earth, but with a temporal displacement that made no sense. "How long ago was that hunt, Clary?" Maybe, an hour. 2. Her eyes were losing focus. I don't understand. Where's New York? Where's the Institute? You're not on Earth, Crusher said gently, pressing a hypospray against Clary's neck. The woman's body relaxed almost immediately, the medication taking hold. You're aboard a starship in deep space, approximately 500 light-years from Earth. We'll explain everything once you're stabilized. As Clary's eyes closed and unconsciousness claimed her, Picard straightened, his mind already cataloging the impossible. A woman claiming to hunt demons. Unexplained energy signatures. Technology or artifacts he couldn't identify. A dimensional rift that had deposited her, inexplicably, on his ship. Captain, Data's voice came through his comm badge. I am analyzing the transporter logs from Cargo Bay 3. The origin signature predates our vessel's construction by approximately 360 years. Picard closed his eyes briefly. Explain that, Mr. Data. I cannot, sir. The temporal variance suggests the woman either originates from Earth's past or from a parallel timeline. The subspace signature is unlike anything in Starfleet databases. Get me everything you can on her physiology, her technology, those markings, Picard said. And Data? Find out what a Shadowhunter is. As Crusher and her medical team transported Clary to sickbay, Picard stood alone in Cargo Bay 3, staring at the faint scorch marks where the woman had materialized. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the mysteries they harbored. But Jean-Luc Picard had devoted his life to exploration, to understanding the unknown. This woman, Clary, represented something that defied the Federation's fundamental understanding of reality. And if the universe could surprise him once, it could do so again. The question was, what had she brought with her to the 24th century? And what, or who, might follow? Sickbay's diagnostic bed hummed with gentle authority as Dr. Beverly Crusher monitored the unconscious woman's vital signs. The readings were stabilizing, thanks to a combination of dermal regenerators and targeted medication, but the anomalies persisted. On the display screen above Clary's bed, her cellular structure flickered between perfectly normal human biology and something altogether stranger, energy patterns that seemed to pulse with an intelligence of their own. Captain on deck, announced the computer as Picard entered sickbay, still in his command uniform, having come directly from the bridge. Crusher looked up from her analysis, frustration evident in the set of her shoulders. Her wounds are healing faster than they should, Crusher said without preamble. Standard human recovery time would take weeks. At this rate, she'll be mobile in hours. Whatever those marks are on her skin, and I'm calling them runes, until we know better. They're accelerating cellular regeneration. Data stood at a secondary console, his hands folded before him, his expression unchanging as he processed streams of information. I have cross-referenced the markings on her skin with 847 known symbol systems, Captain. There is a 94.3% probability match to medieval Enochian script, combined with elements of Hebrew mysticism and symbols not found in any Federation linguistic database. Picard approached the diagnostic bed, studying Clary's face. In unconsciousness, she looked younger, perhaps late 20s, but there was a hardness to her features that suggested experience far beyond her apparent years. What about her claim regarding demons and hunting? Highly problematic, Data replied. The term demon has appeared in Earth's historical and religious texts for millennia, but modern Federation science has established no evidence of demonic entities. However, the woman's physiological markers suggest exposure to high-energy phenomena that current medical science cannot explain. Her blood contains trace amounts of what appears to be angelic matter, a substance that defies conventional classification. Crusher's eyebrow rose. Angelic matter? Data, that's scientifically impossible, yes, Data acknowledged. And yet, the spectral analysis is definitive. There are proteins in her blood that share structural similarities to human DNA, but with an additional energy matrix woven through them. It is as though her cellular structure has been fundamentally altered by repeated exposure to high-intensity radiation of a type we have no instruments to fully measure. Picard leaned against the nearest console, his mind working through the implications. So she is human, but altered. Enhanced. And these runes on her skin, they're more than decoration. They're technology of some kind, or something analogous to it. Precisely, sir, Data said. When I scanned her with our medical tricorder, the runes generated a feedback loop in the device. They appear to be communicating with her physiology at a quantum level. The energy signature is faint, approximately 20% below normal output, but it is definitely present and appears to be degraded. Degraded how? Picard asked sharply. The energy matrix surrounding the runes is being gradually disrupted by our vessel's subspace field, Data explained. The dimensional rift that brought her here may have damaged the quantum coherence of her marks. I estimate she is currently operating at approximately 80 to 85% of her intended capacity. Full restoration might require returning her to her native dimensional signature, or allowing time for her cellular structure to recalibrate to our universe's subspace topology. Before Picard could respond, Clary's eyes snapped open. She gasped, her body convulsing upright with the sudden awareness of waking in an unfamiliar place. Her hand moved instinctively toward her side, where her wounds had been, now little more than faint pink lines where skin had been restored. The runes on her arms flared bright blue, then faded as she took in her surroundings. Easy, Crusher said immediately, approaching with her hands open and visible. You're in our medical bay. Your injuries are healed. You're safe. Clary's breathing was rapid, controlled, the kind of breathing taught to warriors trained from childhood. She assessed the room in seconds, the exits, the positions of the 3 Starfleet officers, the medical equipment that surrounded her like curious mechanical sentinels. When her gaze settled on Picard, something shifted in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, of authority. Or calculation of threat. The transporter, Clary said, her voice stronger now, with an edge of command that suggested she was accustomed to giving orders. You said I'm on a starship. How far from Earth? Approximately 500 light-years, Picard replied calmly. And approximately 360 years in your future, based on our analysis of your temporal signature. I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise D. You are currently in Federation space, operating under Starfleet protocols. Before we proceed further, I need to understand several things. First, what is your full name? Clary Fairchild. Shadowhunter. She sat up fully, ignoring Crusher's protest, and examined her hands. The runes glowed faintly under her scrutiny. Something's wrong. My marks are weak. I can feel it. They're supposed to be stronger. Your runes are operating at approximately 80% efficiency, Data said, his tone conversational and factual. The subspace topology of our universe appears to be causing quantum decoherence in the energy matrix that powers them. I hypothesize that your native dimension operates on different physical principles than our own. Clary looked at him directly, at his pale, artificial face and golden eyes. She didn't flinch. You're not human. Affirmative. I am an android. Rank of Lieutenant Commander. I function as the Chief of Operations aboard this vessel. Something like respect flickered across Clary's face. She understood tools, understood being made for a purpose. Then you'll understand this, Shadowhunters don't belong in places where demons don't exist. And if there are no demons, then there's no hunt. And if there's no hunt. She trailed off, but the implications were clear. Without her purpose, without her marks functioning at full capacity, Clary Fairchild was simply a young woman, far from home, in a universe that didn't need her. Perhaps, Picard said carefully, we should discuss what exactly a Shadowhunter is. Your runes, your training, your mission, all of it. Because if you're going to remain aboard this vessel, I need to understand what you are and why you're here. Clary met his gaze directly, and Picard saw in her eyes the weight of someone trained for violence from childhood, burdened with responsibility beyond her years. You want my story? Fine. But you need to understand one thing first. In my world, there are rules. Laws that have governed the supernatural underworld for thousands of years. And the first rule is that we hide. We hunt demons in the shadows while humanity lives in ignorance. But here. She looked at her fading runes. Here, I'm not sure those rules apply anymore. Then we will establish new ones, Picard said. Together. But first, rest. Recover. Tomorrow, we'll have a proper conversation. For now, you're under the Federation's protection, and aboard this ship, you're a guest, not a prisoner. You have my word. Clary settled back against the diagnostic bed, exhaustion and medication pulling at her consciousness. Your word. That's quaint. Where I come from, words are nothing. Only the Clave's law matters. Only the hunt. Perhaps, Picard said quietly, you'll find that there are other things that matter here. As Clary drifted back toward sleep, Picard exchanged a look with Crusher and Data. The woman from the past had arrived carrying secrets that would challenge everything the Enterprise DS crew believed about their universe. And Picard, pragmatist, explorer, diplomat, knew that the Real work was just beginning. Behind him, the stars continued their eternal dance, unknowing that one of them had been changed forever by the arrival of a warrior from a world science had never detected, magic it had never measured, and a purpose it would never fully understand. Picard's ready room was bathed in the soft glow of the starfield beyond his viewport. Earth hung in the distance, a blue marble wrapped in clouds, reduced by perspective to something impossibly small. He sat across from Clary, who had changed into a standard-issue Starfleet uniform at Crusher's insistence. The black fabric looked wrong on her, lacking the leather, the weapons, the visual markers of her true station. But her posture remained that of a hunter. Alert, coiled, ready to move in any direction. Between them sat 2 cups of tea. Clary had refused replicated food at first, suspecting it of being some form of Federation deception, until Data explained the molecular reconstruction process with such clinical precision that she accepted it as a tool, no different from a blade or a rune. The Clave, Picard began, is essentially a governing body. The Shadowhunter Clave, Clary corrected, cradling the teacup without drinking. We have institutes in every major city. Mine is in New York. We're governed by the Clave's laws, the accords, treaties between Shadowhunters and the downworld factions. Vampires, werewolves, warlocks, fae. We keep the peace between humans and supernatural creatures. We hunt demons. We protect the innocent. And these demons, they are sentient entities that exist to cause harm. Demons exist to feed, Clary said flatly. On human souls, on emotion, on pain. Some are intelligent enough to make deals or negotiate. Most are just predatory. My job was to track them, identify them, kill them before they slaughtered innocents. Data, standing to the side with his hands clasped before him, processed this information with evident fascination. Your role is thus predicated on the assumption that demonic entities are inherently hostile and cannot be reasoned with or integrated into a peaceful society. That's not an assumption, Clary said sharply. That's the result of thousands of years of experience. Demons don't negotiate in good faith. They don't coexist peacefully. They destroy. And if you don't kill them, they kill you and everyone you care about. Picard leaned back slightly. Here was the central conflict, already crystallizing before him. The Federation's prime directive establishes that we do not interfere with the development of less advanced civilizations. It also establishes protocols for peaceful coexistence with even the most hostile species we encounter. The Borg, despite their destructive nature, are not exterminated on sight. They are contained, negotiated with, sometimes even reasoned with. Your approach, preemptive elimination, runs counter to fundamental Starfleet philosophy. The Borg assimilate, Clary said. They transform people into extensions of themselves. Demons don't do that. They just kill. And they keep killing until someone stops them. She set down her teacup with deliberate care. I understand you have rules, Captain. Rules are important. But in my world, the rule is simple, hunt or be hunted. There is no middle ground. Perhaps, Picard said slowly, because your world has never had to find one. Before Clary could respond, the bridge alert chimed, a gentle pulse that signaled an incoming communication. Picard tapped his comm badge. Picard here. Captain, came Worf's gravelly voice from the bridge. We are detecting unusual subspace fluctuations in Sector 7G. Multiple energy signatures, configuration unknown. They do not match any known starship profiles. Picard and Clary exchanged a glance. She was on her feet before he finished speaking. How many? 3 distinct signatures, Worf reported. They appear to be on an intercept course. Red alert, Picard commanded, already moving toward the door. All hands to battle stations. Clary, with me. The Enterprise D hummed with the sudden urgency of red alert, its running lights shifting to crimson. The bridge was a controlled chaos of focused activity as Picard took his command chair. Worf stood at tactical. His massive frame silhouetted against the starfield as he analyzed the incoming contacts. Shields up, Picard ordered. Yellow alert status on weapons. Do not fire unless fired upon. Open hailing frequencies on all standard bands. Hailing frequencies open, sir, replied Ensign Riker at communications. No response to standard Federation greeting. They are slowing, data reported from Ops, his golden eyes reflecting the data streams flowing across his console. Establishing position approximately 50,000 kilometers from our current location. Holding at that distance. Scans indicate they are powering weapons. Clary stood to the side of the command chair, her body absolutely still, but her runes beginning to glow with an intensity that made Picard's hair stand on end. The marks on her skin were no longer faint, they were brilliant, burning with blue-white fire that seemed to pierce the air itself. Captain, Data said, a note of uncertainty entering his voice, rare enough to command immediate attention. I am detecting an energy signature from one of the contacts that matches the dimensional variance of our guest's arrival. It is as though the ship itself is partially phased out of our normal space-time continuum. Romulans? Worf suggested, his hand hovering over the tactical console. Negative, Data replied. The configuration is unknown. The energy signature does not match any Romulan vessel in our database. However, I am detecting cloaking technology far more sophisticated than anything we have encountered. Picard rose from his chair, moving to stand before the view screen. 3 ships materialized at the edge of visual range, sleek, predatory, their hulls a dark metallic gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their designs were geometric, almost crystalline, with sharp angles and protrusions that served no obvious purpose. They were unlike anything in the Federation's collective knowledge. They're beautiful, Clary whispered. But her voice carried no admiration, only a hunter's recognition of a dangerous predator. No. No, no, no. Captain, she said, turning to face him directly. Those aren't ships. Or they are, but they're not what you think. That energy signature. I know that signature. It's demonic. Infernal. That's impossible, but I know what I'm sensing. Picard's jaw tightened. Explain. Demons can't cross dimensions on their own, Clary said rapidly, her professional composure cracking slightly. It requires a vessel, a conduit, someone with enough power to tear through the barriers between worlds. But nothing in my time had that capability. Nothing except, she stopped abruptly. Except what? Picard pressed. Except the greater demons. The oldest ones. The ones that were exiled from our dimension centuries ago. Clary's hand moved instinctively toward where a weapon should have been. If those things have found a way back, or if they've been waiting here all along. The calm erupted with a hail, but it wasn't words, it was a sound. A vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves, a frequency that made everyone on the bridge physically recoil. It wasn't language. It was hunger given voice. Incoming transmission, Ensign Riker reported, struggling to maintain her composure. Audio only. I cannot identify the source language. It does not match any known dialect. Put it through, Picard ordered, though every instinct told him this was dangerous. The sound that emerged was no longer just a vibration, it was words, though spoken in a voice that seemed to come from multiple directions at once, layered and discordant. Federation vessel. We sense a familiar presence aboard. A Shadowhunter. You harbor something that belongs to us. Surrender the girl, and you will be permitted to leave this space intact. Picard's eyes locked with Clary's. In that moment, he understood the true scope of her world. Not a matter of hunting in shadows, but of standing against forces that existed beyond the comprehension of his science, his technology, his carefully ordered universe. This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the United Federation of Planets, he said, his voice steady and clear. I do not surrender any being under my protection. If you wish to negotiate, identify yourselves and state your intentions clearly. The response was laughter, a sound like breaking glass, like screaming metal, like something fundamental tearing apart. And in that moment, Clary's runes flared so brightly that everyone on the bridge had to shield their eyes. We are the Ashmedai, the voice hissed. We are hunger. We are pain. We are everything your precious Federation believes it has eliminated from existence. And Shadowhunter. The voice shifted, becoming almost intimate. We remember you. We remember your bloodline. And we have come to collect what was promised to the shadows long ago. The three ships began to move, their trajectory shifting to intercept the Enterprise D. And as weapons armed and shields flickered to life, Picard understood that the universe, his carefully rationalized, scientifically ordered universe, had just become infinitely more complicated. The Enterprise D shuddered as the first volley struck the shields. It was not the familiar impact of phaser fire or photon torpedoes, it was something else entirely. The energy bolts that impacted their defensive screens crackled with an unholy luminescence, leaving trails of corrupted light in their wake. Alarms screamed across the bridge as systems registered impacts that their engineering teams had no protocols to handle. Shields holding at 87%, Worf reported, his massive frame braced against the tactical console as another blast rocked the ship. But their weapons are unlike anything in our database. They are penetrating our deflector grid more efficiently than expected. At this rate, we have approximately 4 minutes before catastrophic shield failure. Picard gripped the armrest of his command chair, his mind racing through options. Return fire. Pattern Delta. All weapons. Aye, sir, Worf said, his fingers dancing across the tactical interface. The Enterprise D responded with its full arsenal, phaser banks blazing, photon torpedoes streaking toward the three demonic vessels. For a moment, Picard allowed himself a breath of hope. Then the energy weapons simply dissipated. The photon torpedoes detonated against empty space. They are phasing in and out of our dimensional frequency, Data reported, his voice taking on the measured tone of analytical concern. Their cloaking technology, or whatever mechanism they are employing, allows them to exist partially outside our normal space-time continuum. Our weapons cannot acquire a stable target because the targets are not fully present in our reality. That's not cloaking, Clary said from her position at the side of the bridge. Her runes were burning so brightly now that they cast long shadows across her face, and her voice had taken on a resonance that seemed to echo from somewhere deeper than her throat. That's dimensional phasing. They're partially anchored in the demonic dimension. Our weapons can't touch them because they're not entirely here. Then how do we fight them? Picard demanded, turning to face her directly. With something that exists in both dimensions, Clary replied. Her hand moved to her arm, where the runes glowed with an intensity that made the air shimmer around her. My marks. They're partially demonic, channeled through angelic lineage, but rooted in the same fundamental forces that those things are made of. If I can match their frequency, strengthen the connection, I might be able to. Absolutely not, Picard cut her off. You were already injured when you arrived here. Your runes are operating at reduced capacity in this universe. To push them further could cause permanent damage. Captain, Data interjected, I must note that the Ashmedai vessels are now charging what appears to be a focused energy attack. If they achieve discharge, it will likely overwhelm our shields entirely. We have approximately 90 seconds before impact. Clary was already moving toward the nearest console, her body moving with the fluid grace of someone trained in combat since childhood. You don't understand, Captain. In my world, there are people who can fight demons using sigils and runes because we have centuries of knowledge, training, and power accumulated across bloodlines. But I'm alone here. I'm the only weapon you have against something that exists partially outside your reality. There has to be another way, Crusher's voice came through the comm from sickbay. Clary, if you overload your runes in this dimensional environment. I know the risks, Clary said flatly. She closed her eyes, and the runes on her body began to shift, their pattern changing, transforming from defensive marks into something far more aggressive. Data, I need access to your computer core. I need to understand this ship's subspace field. If I can harmonize my energy signature with the Enterprise's systems, I can create a bridge between dimensions. Just for a few seconds. Just long enough to make those things solid. That is theoretically possible, Data said, but the strain on your physiology could be lethal. Yes, I understand, Clary interrupted. But if I don't do it, we're all dead anyway. Captain, it's your choice. Either you let me try, or you prepare for the moment those ships break through and assimilate or destroy everyone aboard this vessel. Picard looked at this young woman. This Shadowhunter from a world that shouldn't exist, marked with powers that defied scientific explanation, standing in his ready room offering to sacrifice herself for a crew she had known for mere hours. Every instinct told him this was wrong, that there had to be another solution, that the Prime Directive's emphasis on non-interference meant they should not ask her to do this. But the Enterprise D shuddered again, more violently this time. Red lights flooded the bridge. The view screen showed two of the Ashmedai vessels shifting position, moving to flank them. Do it, Picard ordered. Data, assist her. Worf, maintain evasive maneuvers. Buy her time. Clary moved with purposeful speed toward Ops, where Data immediately yielded his position. Her fingers flew across the console with surprising competence. Clearly, the fundamental principles of computing transcended dimensions. I need to feel the subspace field, she murmured, almost to herself. I need to sync my frequency to your deflector grid. The runes on her skin began to pulse in rhythm with the Enterprise DS systems. Picard watched, fascinated and horrified, as her body seemed to become a conduit for energy that shouldn't exist, demonic fire channeled through Shadowhunter marks, harmonizing with Federation technology. It was an impossible fusion of two worlds, bridging the gap between magic and science through sheer force of will. Captain, Worf's voice was strained. The lead vessel is firing again. Direct hit on our starboard shields. They're weakening. Reroute auxiliary power to forward. Deflectors, Picard commanded. Evasive pattern Epsilon. Keep them guessing. But his eyes never left Clary. The young woman's entire body was beginning to glow, not just her runes but her skin itself, as though something beneath her epidermis was burning. Her breathing had become rapid, controlled, the breathing of someone pushing their body to the absolute edge of human endurance. Almost there, she whispered. I can feel it. The dimensional barriers. They're so thin here. Just need to push. The Enterprise DS lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. And then something changed. The view screen shifted, and suddenly the three demonic vessels became visible, not as ghosts or shimmering partial images, but as solid, three-dimensional objects occupying the same space as the Enterprise. They were fully anchored in normal spacetime. Shields are stable, Data reported, his voice carrying a note of wonder. The dimensional phasing has been disrupted. The Ashmedai vessels are now solid targets. Fire at will, Picard commanded. All weapons, maximum yield. The Enterprise D unleashed hell itself. Phaser banks carved lines of brilliant light across the darkness of space. Photon torpedoes streaked toward their targets, no longer passing through empty air but striking true. The first Ashmedai vessel exploded in a cascade of infernal fire. Not the clean explosion of Federation technology, but something older and far more visceral, as though a wound in reality itself was closing with violence. The other two vessels attempted to retreat, to re-engage their phasing technology. But they were too slow. Worf's tactical genius, finally given a target he could hit, unleashed a barrage that would have been considered overkill against any conventional enemy. The second ship disintegrated. The third managed to partially phase out before a torpedo detonated against its hull, splitting it apart across multiple dimensional frequencies. Sick bay was quiet in the way that only a medical facility housing the critically injured could be. Clary lay on the diagnostic bed, unconscious, her breathing steady but shallow. The runes on her skin were still visible, but they had transformed, no longer glowing with inner fire, they looked like ordinary tattoos now, beautiful but inert. Dr. Crusher stood over her readings, reviewing them for the 100th time, hoping that the next scan would show something different. It never did. The energy matrix is completely depleted, Crusher said to Picard, who stood in the doorway, his uniform still bearing scorch marks from the bridge explosions. Whatever power source was driving the runes, whether you call it demonic, angelic, or something else entirely, it's gone. The marks themselves are still part of her cellular structure, but they're functionally dead. Could they regenerate? Picard asked. I don't know, Crusher admitted. We don't have a baseline for this. I'm working from first principles, trying to understand biology that shouldn't exist. But my best guess? No. At least not in this dimension. The energy she channeled through them was finite. She burned through years, maybe decades, of accumulated power in minutes. Picard moved closer to the diagnostic bed, studying Clary's face. In sleep, she looked even younger, the weight of her burden temporarily lifted. She knew that, he said quietly. When she made the choice to do this, she understood the cost. Which makes her either incredibly brave or incredibly reckless, Crusher replied. Possibly both. Before Picard could respond, Data's voice came through the comm system. Captain, you are needed on the bridge. We are receiving a hail from a Federation starbase. Also, there is a matter regarding the dimensional signature of the Ashmedai vessels. Analysis is complete. Picard exchanged a glance with Crusher. On my way. Beverly, keep me updated on her condition. And Doctor. She's to have security posted outside sickbay. No one enters without my authorization. You think she's a security risk? Crusher asked, surprised. No, Picard said. I think she's a refugee from a world that just tried to kill her. And I think she might not take that well when she wakes up. The bridge was a controlled flurry of activity as Picard took his command chair. The starfield before them was empty now, the wreckage of the Ashmedai vessels having been scanned, catalogued, and largely left where it lay, a grim monument to the encounter. "Report," Picard commanded. "Starbase 515 is hailing us on secure Federation channels," Riker reported from communications. "They're requesting our status and asking for details on the encounter we just had. Sir, they're also indicating that Section 31 wants to debrief us as soon as we make port." Picard's jaw tightened slightly. Section 31, the Federation's shadowy intelligence agency, operating in the gray spaces between law and necessity. "Put them on hold. Data, your analysis." Data turned from his console, his expression carrying the weight of troubling discoveries. "Captain, I have completed spectral analysis of the Ashmedai vessel's construction. The results are significant. The fundamental composition of their hull plating contains elements not found on any periodic table in our database. However, when I cross-referenced the energy signatures they were emitting with historical records, I found something remarkable." "Go on," Picard prompted. "There is a 94.7% probability that these vessels, or vessels of similar design and capability, have been present in Federation space for at least 300 years. Their energy signatures match 17 documented anomalous incidents dating back to the 2060s, when Earth was first developing warp capability. Captain, if the Ashmedai have been operating in our dimension for 3 centuries, and if they possess the capability to partially phase out of normal spacetime, then the Federation's understanding of its own history may require substantial revision." Worf leaned forward at tactical, his voice gravelly with the implications. "You're saying they've been hunting in our space the entire time. And we never detected them." "Precisely," Data confirmed. "Which suggests that either their phasing technology is far more advanced than our sensors can detect when they are not actively attacking, or they have established a covert presence that has evaded detection through alternative means." Picard stood, moving to the view screen to examine the wreckage more closely. "Clary mentioned that greater demons were exiled from her dimension centuries ago. She didn't know how they escaped or where they went. We may have just discovered the answer. They didn't escape, they invaded. And they've been here ever since, operating in the shadows of Federation space, feeding on something we couldn't see or measure." "Then the question becomes," Worf said, "what were they feeding on? If they've been here for 300 years, there must be evidence of their activity. Missing persons, unexplained deaths, documented anomalies that we attributed to other causes. I will begin cross-referencing documented deaths and disappearances across Federation records," Data said. "However, Captain, there is another concern. If the Ashmedai have established a presence in our dimension, and if they were actively hunting, then it is likely they have either created a power base or established an alliance with another faction. A single operative or small group could not sustain themselves for 3 centuries without support infrastructure." Picard felt the weight of the implications pressing down on him. The Federation had believed itself the dominant power in the quadrant, dealing with known threats from known enemies. Now it appeared they had been sharing their space with an enemy they didn't even know existed. "Recall all starship captains to their sectors," Picard ordered. "I want increased patrols, enhanced sensor sweeps, and alert status elevated across the board. And get me everything we have on unusual deaths, missing persons cases, and documented but unexplained incidents dating back to first contact with warp capability. If there are more Ashmedai out there, I want to know about them before they make contact." "Aye, sir," Riker acknowledged, already inputting commands. Picard turned back to the view screen, but his thoughts were with the young woman in sickbay. Clary had been trained from childhood to recognize demonic presence, to hunt it, to eliminate it. And the Federation had spent 3 centuries completely oblivious to an enemy that had been feeding in their space the entire time. The question now was not whether Shadowhunters belonged in the Star Trek universe. The question was, how had the Star Trek universe ever survived without them? The comm chimed. Crusher's voice came through, urgent but controlled. "Captain, you should come to sickbay. She's waking up." Picard was already moving toward the turbolift. "On my way." When he arrived at sickbay, Clary was awake, but she was not conscious in any meaningful sense. Her body thrashed against the medical restraints that Crusher had applied, her eyes open but unfocused, her voice hoarse with screams that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. "The marks," she was crying out. "The marks are gone. I can't feel them. I can't feel anything. Mom, I can't," she gasped, her body convulsing. "They're inside me. They're all inside me now. I can feel them burning. The Ashmedai, there." "Clary," Picard said firmly, moving to her bedside. "Clary, you're safe. You're in sickbay aboard the Enterprise D. The Ashmedai are dead." Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, clarity flickered there, recognition, understanding, and then something far darker. The realization of what she had lost. "My marks," she whispered. "Tell me they're not gone. Tell me you fixed them." Picard exchanged a glance with Crusher. There was no way to soften this blow, no way to gentle the truth. "I'm sorry. Your rune matrix was completely exhausted when you anchored the dimensional bridge. The marks are still part of your cellular structure, but they're no longer active. They can't be repaired, not with Federation technology. They're inert." The silence that followed was absolute. Clary stopped struggling. Her body went completely still, as though all the strength, all the will that animated her, had simply drained away. "Then I'm not a Shadowhunter anymore," she said quietly. "Without my marks, I'm just, ordinary. I'm just a human woman in a time and place where everything I knew is dead. My mother, my father, everyone I've ever trained with, all of them are dead. The institutes are gone. The clave is gone. And I'm alone." "You're not alone," Picard said gently. "You're part of this crew now. Part of the Federation." Clary's laugh was bitter, broken. "The Federation. Where there are no demons, so there's no hunt. Where everything is supposed to be rational and scientific and peaceful. And I'm a warrior with no war to fight." Picard pulled a chair close to her bedside and sat down, his weathered face reflecting the weight of command, the burden of understanding others. "You're wrong. There is still a war. You just didn't know it existed. The Ashmedai have been hunting in Federation space for 300 years. They've been killing people, feeding on fear and pain, operating in the shadows while we remained blind to their presence. You've already killed 3 of their vessels. You've already made a difference." Clary turned her head to look at him directly. "At what cost?" "My marks are gone, Captain. Everything I was is gone." "No," Picard said. "Your marks are gone. But you're still here. You still have your skills, your training, your knowledge. And more than that. You have something the Federation desperately needs. You have the ability to see threats that our sensors cannot detect. To understand an enemy that our scientists didn't even know existed. That is worth far more than any rune." Clary was silent for a long moment, staring at her pale, unmarked arms. The runes were still visible, but only as faint scars now, like pale tattoos that had faded with age. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said finally. Then, Picard replied, "Perhaps it's time to find out." 3 days passed before Clary was cleared for release from sickbay. 3 days of physical therapy, of learning to move her body without the constant awareness of her mark's presence, of grappling with a grief so profound that it transcended the merely emotional. Dr. Crusher had explained the phenomenon in clinical terms, phantom limb syndrome, but for an entire sensory system that had been part of her identity since birth. Clary understood it as something simpler and far more devastating. The loss of self. She wore a standard Starfleet uniform now, a guest outfit, not yet an official posting. The black fabric felt foreign against her skin, lacking the weight and texture of her Shadowhunter leathers. But when she caught her reflection in the corridor viewports, she had to admit that she looked the part of a Federation officer. The uniform was a costume that made her invisible, transformed her from a warrior into just another human in a galaxy full of humans. Picard had arranged for her to have quarters near the senior staff section. When Clary entered her assigned room, she found it sparse but comfortable, a bed, a desk, a viewport looking out onto the starfield. She stood at that viewport for nearly an hour, watching the stars slide past, feeling the gentle hum of the Enterprise DS warp core beneath her feet. This ship had become her world now, and she had no idea how to exist in it. A chime sounded at her door. Data stood in the corridor when she opened it, his pale artificial face perfectly serene. "I trust your quarters are satisfactory," he said. "Captain Picard has requested that I provide you with a comprehensive briefing on Federation history, technology, and protocols. He believes this will assist in your transition to life aboard the Enterprise D." Clary stepped aside to let him enter. "I'm not sure I'm capable of learning anything right now." "On the contrary," Data said, moving to the desk with his characteristic precise gait. "Research indicates that traumatized individuals often benefit from engaging in structured learning activities. The mental discipline required promotes neural reorganization and facilitates psychological recovery. Additionally, your unique perspective on demonic entities and Shadowhunter methodology could prove invaluable to understanding the threat posed by the Ashmedai." Despite herself, Clary found a faint smile crossing her face. Data's clinical approach to trauma counseling was almost refreshing in its honesty. "All right. Tell me about the Federation." What followed was a comprehensive overview that would have taken weeks in her own world but which Data delivered with systematic precision. He explained the history of humanity's emergence into space travel, the formation of the Federation, the principles of the Prime Directive, the nature of key species and their governments, and the technological infrastructure that allowed starships like the Enterprise D to traverse the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. Clary listened with the attention of someone trained to absorb tactical information. She found herself asking questions. Sharp, intelligent questions that revealed her mind was still functioning even if her marks were not. She asked about vulnerabilities in Federation defense systems, about the political relationships between major powers, about how information moved through Federation channels. "You ask the questions of a military strategist," Data observed at one point. "I was trained to think about threats," Clary replied. "In the shadow world, if you didn't understand your enemy's capabilities and limitations, you died." "Old habits." "Perhaps not habits," Data suggested. "Perhaps skills that remain relevant despite the loss of your marks. The Federation's strategic defense relies on officers who can identify threats that others overlook. Your perspective could be valuable." Over the following week, Clary fell into a routine. Mornings with Data, learning Federation history and traumatized individuals often benefit from engaging in structured learning activities. The mental discipline required promotes neural reorganization and facilitates psychological recovery. Additionally, your unique perspective on demonic entities and Shadowhunter methodology could prove invaluable to understanding the threat posed by the Ashmedai. Despite herself, Clary found a faint smile crossing her face. Data's clinical approach to trauma counseling was almost refreshing in its honesty. "All right. Tell me about the Federation." What followed was a comprehensive overview that would have taken weeks in her own world but which Data delivered with systematic precision. He explained the history of humanity's emergence into space travel, the formation of the Federation, the principles of the Prime Directive, the nature of key species and their governments, and the technological infrastructure that allowed starships like the Enterprise D to traverse the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. Clary listened with the attention of someone trained to absorb tactical information. She found herself asking questions. Sharp, intelligent questions that revealed her mind was still functioning even if her marks were not. She asked about vulnerabilities in Federation defense systems, about the political relationships between major powers, about how information moved through Federation channels. You ask the questions of a military strategist, Data observed at one point. I was trained to think about threats, Clary replied. In the shadow world, if you didn't understand your enemy's capabilities and limitations, you died. Old habits. Perhaps not habits, Data suggested. Perhaps skills that remain relevant despite the loss of your marks. The Federation's strategic defense relies on officers who can identify threats that others overlook. Your perspective could be valuable. Over the following week, Clary fell into a routine. Mornings with Data, learning Federation history and creatures that had to be controlled or destroyed. Worf seemed to suggest a different possibility, that honor and pragmatism could coexist. Tell me about your culture, Clary said. About what it means to be Klingon. Worf's expression shifted, becoming almost thoughtful. We value honor above all else. Glory in battle, loyalty to one's people, the willingness to face death rather than live in shame. But we also understand that sometimes the greatest honor lies in doing what must be done, even when it violates traditional codes. That's not so different from the Shadowhunter way, Clary said quietly. We follow the law, the Clave's rules established over thousands of years. But sometimes, to protect the people we love, we have to break those rules. And we accept the consequences. Then perhaps, Worf said, we are not so different after all. That evening, Picard requested her presence in his ready room. When Clary arrived, she found not just the captain, but also Riker, Crusher, Data, and Worf assembled. Picard gestured for her to sit. We've completed our analysis of the Ashmedai vessels and their presence in Federation space, Picard began. Data has identified 43 documented incidents over the past 3 centuries that match the energy signatures and tactical patterns of demonic activity. Missing persons cases, unexplained deaths, entire colonies that went silent and were discovered empty. All of them previously attributed to natural causes, equipment failure, or unidentified phenomena. You knew they were here, Clary said, understanding the implication. You just didn't know what they were. Exactly, Crusher confirmed. And Section 31 is very interested in understanding how to detect and neutralize this threat more effectively. Section 31, Clary repeated. The intelligence agency you mentioned. The one that operates in the shadows. Yes, Picard said. They represent a necessary evil in Federation structure. A division tasked with handling threats that diplomacy and open conflict cannot address. I have concerns about what they might want to do with you, particularly regarding your knowledge of demonic entities and Shadowhunter methodology. They want to weaponize me, Clary said flatly. It's a possibility we must consider, Riker said. Which is why the captain wanted to brief you before we make port at Starbase 515. Clary leaned back in her chair, thinking through the implications. In her world, she would have had the Clave to protect her interests, to negotiate with governing bodies on her behalf. Here, she had nothing except the protection this ship and its crew offered. What are my options? She asked. We could refuse Section 31's request, Picard said. Argue that you're a civilian refugee from a dimensional anomaly and therefore not subject to Federation military authority. But that would only delay their interest, not eliminate it. Alternatively, you could accept a position with Starfleet. Officially, that would place you under my command rather than Section 31's. A position doing what? Clary asked. That, Picard said, would depend on your skills and your willingness to work within Starfleet structure. We need someone who understands threats that our sensors cannot detect. Someone who can recognize demonic presence and advise us on how to combat it. Someone who can help us understand an enemy we never knew existed. Clary looked around the table, at these officers who had taken her in, protected her, accepted her despite her origins. She thought about her marks, about the life she had lost. And she understood that there was no going back. The past was dead, burned away in a moment of desperation. All that remained was the choice of what came next. "I'll accept the position," she said. "But I have conditions." Picard's eyebrow rose slightly. "Such as?" "First, I want to understand how to use Federation technology as effectively as Shadowhunters use runes. If my marks are gone, I need new tools. Second, I want access to all of Section 31's files on the Ashmedai and any other demonic activity in Federation space. Third, I want the right to refuse orders that would require me to compromise my understanding of what's right, even if it conflicts with Starfleet protocols. The third condition is already part of the Federation's ethical framework," Crusher said with a slight smile. "But the first two are reasonable." "Then we have an agreement," Picard said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Starfleet, Ms. Fairchild." Clary shook his hand, feeling the solidity of the gesture, the weight of commitment. She was no longer a shadow hunter. She had no marks, no clave, no institute. But perhaps, in this vast galaxy governed by science and reason, she could become something new. Something that existed in the space between worlds. She just had to figure out what that meant. Starbase 515 was a massive geometric structure orbiting a lifeless moon in the Caleb sector, a hub of Federation military and intelligence operations designed to monitor the neutral zone and coordinate defense against potential Romulan incursion. Its docking bays could accommodate dozens of starships simultaneously, and its internal corridors were labyrinthine enough to house thousands of personnel. When the Enterprise de-docked, Clary felt the subtle shift in the ship's systems as it transitioned from autonomous warp travel to integrated station infrastructure. Picard had warned her about Section 31. He had explained their philosophy. The Federation's ideals were beautiful and necessary, but naive without an organization willing to do the things that ideals could not justify. Section 31 was that organization. Operating in legal gray areas, making decisions that would never survive public scrutiny, all in service to what they believed was the greater good. The Section 31 operative who met them in the docking bay was a woman named Kessler, mid-50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of Clary's appearance in a single glance. She wore civilian clothing rather than a uniform, a choice Clary understood immediately as deliberate obfuscation. "Captain Picard, welcome back," Kessler said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you must be Ms. Fairchild. We've been very interested in meeting you." "I'm sure you have," Clary replied coolly. "Captain Picard explained your organization's interest in my knowledge." "Knowledge," Kessler repeated, as though tasting the word. "That's one way to describe it. We prefer to think of it as expertise. You have 3 centuries of operational experience fighting entities that the Federation didn't even know existed. That's invaluable." "I have personal experience," Clary corrected. "From a single lifetime. The expertise you're referring to comes from the clave, from thousands of years of accumulated knowledge across multiple generations. I'm one warrior. That's all." Kessler's smile widened slightly, as though Clary had just passed some kind of test. "Come with me. We have a secure conference room where we can discuss operational parameters." The conference room was deep within the station's structure, insulated by multiple layers of dampening fields and security protocols. When the doors closed behind them, Clary felt the subtle weight of isolation. This was a space designed to prevent eavesdropping, to ensure absolute secrecy. Kessler activated a holographic display that showed the known locations of Ashmedai activity across the past 3 centuries. 43 confirmed incidents, Kessler said, gesturing at the map. But we suspect there are far more that we simply haven't recognized as related. The Ashmedai appear to operate in isolated cells. Individual operatives or small groups moving through Federation space, feeding on populations below advanced civilization threshold, then moving on. They've been remarkably efficient at avoiding detection. They're hunting, Clary said, studying the pattern of incidents. Her tactical mind immediately recognized the methodology. They select regions with high population density but limited organized response capability. They feed until they draw too much attention, then they relocate. It's a nomadic predation pattern. Precisely, Kessler agreed. Which suggests they have a support network, a way to move between locations, access resources, coordinate with other operatives. We believe there's a central authority directing their activity, possibly located somewhere in Federation space or nearby. Or in subspace itself, Clary suggested. If they can exist partially outside normal spacetime, they don't need a physical location. They could have a dimensional anchor point that exists between our reality and theirs. The demons in my world had something similar, the shadow market, a place that existed in the spaces between worlds. Warlocks could access it, but humans couldn't enter without magical assistance. Kessler leaned forward with interest. Could we locate such a place? Not with your technology, Clary said. You'd need someone who understands how to sense dimensional barriers, how to read the signs that indicate a breach between worlds. The Clave trained Shadowhunters to recognize these things, but I. She trailed off, the weight of her lost marks pressing down on her again. But you're not a Shadowhunter anymore, Kessler finished gently. Which is actually an advantage from our perspective. You're not bound by Clave law anymore. You're not limited by Shadowhunter protocols. You're free to do what needs to be done without worrying about the accords or traditional rules of engagement. There it was, the true appeal that Section 31 saw in her. Not her knowledge, but her lack of constraints. She was a weapon unbound by law or tradition, someone who had already demonstrated a willingness to sacrifice everything for survival. I won't become an assassin for your organization, Clary said flatly. I won't torture people for information or commit crimes in the name of security. I'll hunt demons. I'll help you understand threats you don't currently recognize. But I won't cross certain lines. And those lines would be? Kessler asked. I won't harm innocent people. I won't execute prisoners or conduct illegal experiments. I won't become something worse than the threats I'm hunting. Kessler nodded slowly. Fair enough. We respect your principles, Miss Fairchild. Which is why we're not asking you to do those things, yet. Right now, we just need you to help us understand the Ashmedai threat more completely. We need you to help us develop protocols for detecting and containing demonic entities. And we need you to help us locate the source of their activity. Over the next week, Clary was moved to a secure facility on Starbase 515, given access to Section 31's intelligence files, and paired with a team of Federation scientists and military strategists. The work was methodical and often frustrating, trying to translate the intuitive understanding of demonic presence that she had developed over years of hunting into scientific frameworks that Federation minds could comprehend and replicate. Dr. Marcus Chen was the lead researcher. A brilliant xenobiologist with degrees from multiple Federation institutions and a reputation for approaching impossible problems with creative methodology. When they first met, Chen studied Clary with the clinical interest of a scientist examining an unusual specimen. Your runes, Chen said, accessing her medical file. They were powered by what you call angelic energy, channeled through demonic biology, correct? Essentially, Clary confirmed. Shadowhunters are part human, part demon. Our ancestors were given demonic power by an angel named Raziel, then bound with angelic marks to control that power and direct it toward hunting. The runes are the physical manifestation of that bond. And now those runes are inert, Chen said. But the demonic and angelic components of your biology are still there, just dormant. Yes. My physiology is still half demon. It always will be. The marks just gave me the ability to consciously access that power. Chen's eyes lit up with the intensity of a researcher who had just glimpsed a promising research direction. Then theoretically, we might be able to create a device that could restore that access. Not the marks themselves, Those seem to require dimensional stability we can't replicate here, but a technological interface that could serve the same function. You're talking about replacing Shadowhunter magic with Federation technology, Clary said slowly. Exactly. A device integrated with your nervous system that could read your demonic biology and amplify your ability to sense and interact with dimensional barriers. You wouldn't have your marks anymore, but you'd have something functionally equivalent, something that might even be more powerful because it could be customized to Federation specifications. Clary's first instinct was to reject the idea outright. The marks had been part of her identity, part of her connection to centuries of Shadowhunter tradition. Replacing them with some kind of technological implant felt like desecration. But as she thought about it more, she realized that Chen was offering her something her own world could never have. A second chance. A way to reclaim the abilities she had lost without sacrificing herself to do it. How long would it take, she asked. 6 months for the full design and implementation, Chen said. Maybe less if we cut some corners. But Clary, I have to be honest with you, this is untested territory. We'd be grafting Federation technology onto a biology that we barely understand. There are risks. Significant ones. Life is risk, Clary replied. In my world, every demon hunt was a risk that I might not come back. I'm willing to take those odds if it means I can still be useful. The work consumed her. Days were spent in medical bays undergoing scans, having her demonic biology mapped in unprecedented detail. Evenings were spent with Chen and the research team, discussing the theoretical framework of how a technological interface might allow her to sense and interact with dimensional barriers. Clary found herself adapting to Federation methodology, learning to think in terms of energy frequencies and quantum states rather than demonic essence and angelic power. It was during one of these late-night sessions that Kessler appeared with new intelligence. A Section 31 operative had detected a spike in Ashmedai activity in the Rigel sector, 3 ships phasing in and out of normal spacetime, approaching a Federation outpost at Outpost 4. We need you, Kessler told Clary directly. We need someone who can sense what they're planning, who can help us understand their tactics. Chen's device is still months away from completion. But you're all we have right now. Clary looked at Chen, who was shaking his head slightly. Don't do this, the scientist said. You're not ready. Without the device, you're back to being a normal human woman. You'll be walking into battle with no advantages. Then I'll adapt, Clary said. She stood, her decision made. I've been adapting since I got here. I'll keep adapting. Because if those things kill people at Outpost 4, then I'll have failed. And I don't fail. She was back aboard the Enterprise D within hours, and Picard was already reviewing coordinates when she arrived on the bridge. The starship jumped to warp, racing toward the Rigel sector at maximum velocity. As the stars streaked past, Clary stood at the bridge viewport and realized something profound. She had spent the past weeks trying to become something new, trying to figure out who Clary Fairchild was without her marks. Now, facing the possibility of direct combat with the Ashmedai again, she understood that the answer had been inside her the whole time. She was a warrior. That was all. The marks were gone, but the warrior remained. And she was done running from what she had become. The Rigel sector was a sprawl of commercial space lanes, mining colonies, and Federation outposts scattered across a region of space that had been colonized over nearly a century. Outpost 4 was a modest installation, a scientific research facility housed in a reinforced station structure, staffed by approximately 200 personnel focused on studying the unique stellar phenomena of the Rigel system. When the Enterprise D emerged from warp at red alert status, the outpost's commander, a Balian named Captain Tef, had already initiated emergency protocols. We're detecting 3 vessels phasing in and out of subspace at irregular intervals, Tef reported via secure channel. They're not responding to hails, and they've begun attacking our shield generators. We estimate we have 40 minutes before the shields collapse completely. Hold position, Picard commanded. Enterprise is moving to intercept. Maintain shield integrity and prepare evacuation procedures. The 3 Ashmedai vessels materialized ahead of them, those same crystalline, geometric shapes that Clary recognized from her previous encounter. But this time, she was able to observe them with tactical clarity rather than the panic of initial contact. The ships were smaller than the Enterprise D, but they moved with a predatory precision that suggested they were designed for tactical flexibility rather than straightforward combat strength. "They're hurting the outpost," Clary said from her position at the secondary tactical station where Picard had placed her. "Look at their positioning. They're not trying to destroy it, they're trying to damage the shields enough to force evacuation. They want the population scattered and vulnerable." "Why?" Data asked, processing the implications. "If the Ashmedai are attempting to feed, a dispersed population would be more difficult to harvest. Because they're not just hunting," Clary realized. "They're testing. Testing our defenses, testing our response capabilities, learning our tactical patterns. This is reconnaissance." Worf leaned forward at tactical, understanding the implication immediately. "They're preparing for a larger operation." Picard's expression hardened. "Evasive pattern Omega. Target the lead vessel with full phaser barrage. Let's remind them they're not dealing with an unprepared outpost." The Enterprise D unleashed a coordinated assault, phaser banks carving brilliant lines of energy across space, photon torpedoes streaking toward their targets. But the Ashmedai vessels were ready this time. They phased partially out of normal space before the weapons could connect, then re-engaged their attacks against the outpost's shields with renewed intensity. "Shields at the outpost are failing faster," Tef reported. "We're evacuating non-essential personnel to the transport hubs, but we're going to lose the scientific facilities." "Clary," Picard said, turning to face her. "Can you sense their dimensional frequency? Can you help us predict their phasing patterns?" Clary closed her eyes, reaching out with senses that should have been augmented by her marks but which now existed only as phantom sensations in her nervous system. The Ashmedai moved between dimensions with a kind of fluid grace, phasing in and out according to a pattern that her instincts insisted was meaningful but which her conscious mind couldn't quite grasp. "They're following a specific sequence," she said slowly. "In for 6 seconds, out for 3, in for 7, out for 4. It's escalating, gradually increasing the time they spend in normal space. They're building to something. A major attack," Data confirmed, analyzing the data stream. "If the pattern continues, they will achieve full dimensional stability in approximately 90 seconds. At that point, they will be unable to phase out of normal space, which means they will be vulnerable, but it also means they will commit fully to this engagement. Then that's when we hit them," Worf said, his hand poised over the tactical controls. "Full weapons barrage the moment they stabilize." But Clary was shaking her head. "No. That's not right. They wouldn't lock themselves into a losing position. There's something else. Something we're not seeing." She opened her eyes and moved to the main viewscreen, studying the 3 vessels with the intensity of a hunter analyzing prey behavior. The lead ship, the one that had been coordinating the attacks on the outpost, was positioned differently from the other 2. It was closer to the outpost, more exposed, drawing the Enterprise D's attention while the other 2 vessels moved into a different pattern entirely. "They're not attacking the outpost to destroy it or to feed on the population," Clary said suddenly. "They're using it as bait. As a distraction. The other 2 ships, where are they going?" Data's fingers flew across his console. "They are moving towards Sector 7 Alpha. There is a significant Romulan vessel in that sector. A warbird conducting covert operations near the neutral zone." The implication crashed down on everyone simultaneously. The Ashmedai weren't working independently. They had allied with the Romulan Star Empire. "Picard to all hands," the captain commanded, his voice taking on the icy clarity of a man confronting a threat he had not anticipated. We have a larger tactical situation developing. The Ashmedai are coordinating with Romulan forces. I want full sensor sweep of the neutral zone. Maximum range. Alert all nearby Federation starships to yellow alert status. Incoming transmission from the Romulan vessel, communications reported. Audio only, heavily encrypted. Decrypt and play, Picard ordered. The voice that emerged was cold, measured, and carried the weight of Romulan command authority. Federation vessel, you are witnessing a new reality. For centuries, your people have maintained dominance in this quadrant through superior technology and coordinated force. But you have been blind to the shadows around you. We have made contact with entities that your science cannot explain and your weapons cannot penetrate. We have formed an alliance that will reshape the balance of power in the Alpha Quadrant. Withdraw from this sector, or face the consequences. The transmission ended. Clary felt the weight of that declaration like a physical blow. The Romulans had discovered the Ashmedai, or the Ashmedai had made first contact with them. Either way, the equation had changed fundamentally. A faction that had been operating covertly for centuries had now stepped openly into Federation space. Worf, status of the Romulan vessel? Picard asked. Moving to intercept the Ashmedai ships, Worf reported. The 3 demonic vessels are maneuvering to match the Warbird's heading. Captain, they're establishing a formation. It looks like they're docking. The Ashmedai ships are integrating with the Romulan vessel's structure. They're merging, Clary said, understanding the tactical implication. Creating a hybrid craft. Combining Federation-style phasing technology with Romulan weaponry and Ashmedai dimensional manipulation. Which would create something that we have no established protocols for, data observed with clinical precision. A vessel that could operate partially in subspace while maintaining the combat capability of a Romulan warbird. Theoretical combat effectiveness would be approximately 400% greater than either vessel operating independently. Picard stood, his mind clearly working through options and contingencies. Get me Admiral Sato at Starbase 515. I want Section 31, I want Starfleet Command, I want every available vessel in this sector redirected to our position. And someone tell me how 3 Ashmedai vessels convince a Romulan commander that an alliance is worth the risk of having those things on their ship. Perhaps, data suggested, they were not convinced. Perhaps they were assimilated or coerced through means we do not yet understand. But Clary knew better. She had hunted demons long enough to understand how they operated, through bargains, through promises, through the exploitation of ambition and fear. The Romulan commander hadn't been convinced because the Ashmedai had offered him something he wanted. Power, perhaps. Or knowledge. Or the assurance that Romulan interests would be protected in whatever came next. We need to move now, Clary said urgently. Before they complete the integration. Once they're fully merged, we won't be able to separate them. The hybrid vessel will be something entirely new, something that combines the worst aspects of Romulan tactics with demonic capabilities we don't have defenses against. Weapon status? Picard demanded. All systems green, Worf confirmed. Photon torpedoes loaded, phasers at maximum capacity, shields fully charged. Then let's remind the Romulans why they fear us, Picard said coldly. Target the Warbird's docking ports. Full barrage. I want those Ashmedai ships separated before they can establish a permanent connection. The Enterprise D unleashed its full arsenal. The view screen filled with the brilliant flare of photon detonations as the torpedoes streaked toward their targets. The Romulan warbird attempted to maneuver, but the Ashmedai vessels were already partially integrated, their phasing technology creating weak points in the warbird's structural integrity. The first 2 Ashmedai ships were blown free by the explosion, their crystalline hulls fragmenting under the violence of the attack. But the third vessel, the lead ship that had been coordinating the assault on the outpost, phased completely out of normal space just before the torpedo impact, and when the dust cleared, it was still docked to the Romulan warbird, now fully integrated into its structure. The hybrid vessel that emerged from the explosion was something no Federation sensor database had ever recorded. The Romulan warbird's sleek predatory lines were now studded with the geometric protrusions of the Ashmedai vessel, and its weapon systems had shifted to accommodate both conventional and infernal technology. It was a nightmare made manifest, science and sorcery merged into a single unified threat. "Captain," the hybrid vessel's communications officer broadcast, speaking in Romulan accented standard English that seemed to echo with harmonic overlays. "I am Commander Vrex of the Romulan Star Empire and voice of the Ashmedai Collective. Your species stands at the threshold of obsolescence. We offer one final opportunity: stand down your vessel and prepare for assimilation into the new order, or be destroyed." Picard's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise D. I speak for a civilization that has faced extinction before and prevailed. You will withdraw from Federation space immediately, or we will ensure that you do not survive to regret this decision." The hybrid vessel began to move, its trajectory shifting to a direct intercept course with the Enterprise D. And Clary understood that they had crossed the threshold from tactical engagement to existential conflict. Everything that came next would determine whether the Federation could survive an enemy that existed partially outside the laws of physics that governed their universe. The bridge of the Enterprise D was a study in controlled intensity as the hybrid vessel approached. Clary stood at the secondary tactical station, her hands braced against the console, feeling the subtle vibration of the starship systems as they prepared for combat unlike any in Starfleet's documented history. The hybrid vessel moved with an unnatural grace. Sometimes phasing partially out of normal space, sometimes solidifying to fire conventional weapons, always maintaining an evasive pattern that made targeting nearly impossible. "They're using the phasing as a defensive tactic," Worf observed, frustration evident in his voice. "Every time we acquire a targeting solution, they shift partially out of subspace. By the time we fire, they're no longer in normal space." "But they can't stay phased and fire conventional weapons simultaneously," Data noted. "The physics are mutually exclusive. If they achieve full-dimensional stability to launch a weapon strike, they become vulnerable for approximately 2.3 seconds. Then that's our window," Picard said. "Worf, I want you to predict their phasing cycle. Anticipate when they'll need to stabilize and have weapons ready to fire the moment they do. Don't wait for confirmation. The moment they're solid, unleash everything we have." "Understood, sir," Worf replied, his massive hands moving across the tactical console with practiced precision. Clary's eyes were locked on the main viewscreen, tracking the hybrid vessel's movements with the intensity of a hunter analyzing prey. But unlike previous encounters with the Ashmedai, she could sense something else now, a presence, almost like a whisper at the edge of her consciousness. It took her a moment to understand what she was sensing. The demonic entity that had merged with the Romulan vessel was old. Incredibly old. Older than the Shadowhunter order itself. "Captain," Clary said, her voice cutting through the tactical chatter. "The demon piloting that vessel, it's not one of the Ashmedai we fought before. It's something far older. Something from the depths of the demonic hierarchy. A greater demon. One of the ancient ones that was supposedly exiled from our dimension centuries ago." "How can you tell?" Crusher asked from her position at the medical station. "I can feel it," Clary said. "It's like recognizing a predator by the way it moves. The demonic entities in my world had hierarchies based on power and age. The older they are, the more accumulated power they have. This one is radiating force in a way that suggests it's been feeding for centuries, growing stronger with every life it consumed. If that's the case," Data said, "then our conventional weapons may be insufficient to neutralize it. We would need either a weapon specifically designed to counter demonic entities, or a force equivalent that exceeds its capacity to adapt." Picard's expression hardened. "Which we don't have." Worf, continue with the phasing intercept strategy. If we can separate the Ashmedai entity from the Romulan vessel, we might be able to contain one or both. The first salvo came without warning. The hybrid vessel phased solid for exactly 2.3 seconds, just as Data had predicted, and unleashed a coordinated attack combining Romulan disruptor beams with energy that crackled with infernal power. The Enterprise DS shields flared under the impact, and Worf's response was immediate. Photon torpedoes and phaser banks unleashing their full destructive potential at the crystalline protrusions that identified the demonic component of the hybrid vessel. Two of the crystalline structures detonated in cascades of infernal fire. The hybrid vessel phased out of normal space immediately, reappearing 30 kilometers distant, its weapons charging for another salvo. Damage report, Picard commanded. Shields at 74% and holding, Riker reported from the auxiliary station. Structural integrity is stable. But Captain, at this rate of weapons exchange, we'll reach critical shield failure in approximately 11 minutes. Then we need to end this faster, Picard said. He turned to Clary. Is there any way you can disrupt the connection between the Romulan vessel and the demonic entity? Any weakness in how they're integrated? Clary closed her eyes, reaching out with senses that were no longer augmented by her marks but which still functioned on some level she didn't fully understand. The integration between the Romulan vessel and the ancient demon was deep, fundamental. They had bonded at a level that suggested the demon had essentially consumed the Romulan commander's consciousness, using his body and his ship as a vessel for its own will. If I could get close enough, Clary said slowly, I might be able to sense the junction points where they're connected. If we could damage those points simultaneously. You'd need to be aboard that vessel, Crusher said immediately. Which is suicide. Not necessarily, Picard said, his tactical mind already working through possibilities. Transporter lock, if we can get past their shields, we could beam you directly into their engineering section. You find the junction points, plant charges, and we detonate them from here. That's asking her to walk into an enemy warship with no support, Riker protested. Captain, the tactical profile alone. I know the risks, Picard interrupted. Clary, are you willing to attempt this? She should have said no. Every logical part of her mind screamed that this was a suicide mission, that she was no longer enhanced enough to survive in a hostile environment, that the probability of success was negligible. But Clary Fairchild had spent her entire life making impossible choices in the face of demonic threats. This was just one more impossible choice. Yes, she said. Get me some explosives and a way to sense the junction points, and I'll do it. In the minutes before transport, Dr. Chen, who had been monitoring the battle from Starbase 515 secure facility, helped Clary understand the theoretical framework of what she needed to find. The junction between the demonic entity and the Romulan vessel would manifest as a kind of energy nexus, a point where Romulan technology and infernal power were fused together. Chen designed a small scanning device, barely larger than a wrist communicator, that could detect the specific energy signature of that fusion. This will only work if you can get close to the junctions, Chen warned via subspace communication. The detection range is maybe 5 meters, tops. Then I'll get close, Clary replied, securing the device to her wrist. She had changed into a tactical uniform, dark and form-fitting, and she had insisted on carrying a phaser despite Worf's protests that it would be nearly useless against a greater demon. Your marks aren't coming back, Worf had said bluntly. A phaser will annoy it, but nothing more. Then I'll annoy it repeatedly until something works, Clary had replied. The transport beam caught her in its embrace, and the bridge of the Enterprise D dissolved into a shimmer of blue-white light. When reality reasserted itself, Clary found herself in the engineering section of the hybrid vessel, surrounded by Romulan technology that had been violently integrated with crystalline structures that pulsed with demonic energy. The air tasted of ozone and copper, the smell of a reality being torn apart and forced into alignment with another's will. Alarms began screaming the moment she materialized. Running feet echoed through the corridors as Romulan security forces responded to the intruder alert. Clary didn't wait for them to arrive. She moved deeper into the ship, using the scanner to track the energy signatures, following them like a hunter tracking prey through a forest of twisted metal and corrupted light. The first junction point was in the main reactor chamber. Romulan engineers scattered in panic as Clary emerged, phaser in hand. She fired at the crystalline structure fused to the reactor core, watching as the phaser blast carved a small gouge in the infernal material. It barely slowed the structure's pulsing, but it was a start. She planted the first explosive charge, a quantum detonator that Chen had calibrated to detonate in synchronization with the others. The device adhered to the crystalline structure, invisible against its luminescent surface. 3 more junction points lay deeper in the ship's structure. Clary fought her way toward them, using tactics learned from years of demon hunting but adapted to the confined corridors of a starship. A Romulan officer came around a corner with disruptor raised. She disabled him with a precisely calculated nerve strike, no kill, just incapacity. Another officer tried to ambush her from above. She dove, rolled, came up firing her phaser in a pattern designed to distract rather than eliminate. In her world, Shadowhunters killed demons without hesitation. But these were Romulan soldiers, beings that could be reasoned with, beings that were victims as much as threats. The demon had possessed their commander and used him to command the ship, but the crew was still essentially enslaved. The second junction point was in the weapons control center. The infernal energy here was thicker, more concentrated. This was where the Ashmedai force was most directly integrated with the vessel's systems. Clary could feel it like a pressure against her skin, a presence that seemed to recognize her as a threat despite the absence of her marks. As she approached the junction point, the energy exploded outward. Not a physical explosion, something far worse. The demonic force reached out like invisible hands and slammed her against the wall, driving the breath from her lungs. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, paralyzed by the raw power of something that had existed for millennia. Then her training kicked in. She had been trained her entire life to resist demonic influence, to fight through possession attempts, to remain conscious and focused despite the assault on her senses. The paralysis broke. She gasped for breath and moved forward, planting the second charge even as the demonic force battered against her consciousness like a creature trying to claw its way into her mind. The final 2 junction points were easier now. The demon seemed to realize what she was doing and began pulling back, trying to minimize the damage she could cause. But that was exactly what Clary wanted. Every ounce of demonic force the entity used to resist her was force it couldn't use to defend the vessel or attack the Enterprise D. When she planted the final charge, Picard's voice came through her comm badge. Charges in place. 4 junctions, Clary confirmed, breathing heavily. Ready for detonation on your command. Get out of there, Picard ordered. Transporter lock acquired. Stand by for beam out. But Clary didn't leave immediately. She stood in the main reactor chamber, looking at the crystalline structure that pulsed with infernal power, and she felt something shift inside her. The demonic component of her own biology, the half-demon heritage that had never quite left her despite the loss of her marks, recognized the ancient power, understood it on a level that transcended language or logic. For just a moment, she could feel the extent of its age, its hunger, its desperate need to feed on more and more power. It was a creature trapped in a cycle of consumption, unable to ever be satisfied, forever driven by the void within its core. Understanding flooded through her. This was what she had been hunting her entire life. Not demons as abstract threats, but as broken creatures operating on instinct and hunger, unable to transcend their fundamental nature. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was the real difference between Shadowhunters and the Federation. Shadowhunters killed demons. But the Federation believed that all beings, no matter how alien their nature, deserved the chance to be understood. Clary, Picard's voice was urgent. Transport now. The transporter beam caught her. And as she materialized back on the Enterprise D bridge, she triggered the detonation sequence. The hybrid vessel's reactor exploded from within, crystalline structures shattering and reforming as the demonic force was violently separated from the Romulan systems. The greater demon's scream echoed across the void, a sound of rage and anguish that seemed to transcend normal spacetime, as the ancient entity found itself suddenly exposed, vulnerable, separated from its borrowed vessel. The Romulan warbird, no longer integrated with the demonic force, began to break apart. Its systems, fundamentally compromised by the removal of the demonic anchors, started cascading into shutdown. "Emergency transport," Picard commanded. "Get as many of that warbird's crew as possible. They're victims, not enemies." Clary watched from the bridge viewport as the Enterprise DS transporters began pulling Romulan crew members from their dying vessel. The hybrid form was dissolving, the fusion that had seemed so permanent revealed as fragile when the anchoring points were destroyed. But the greater demon, she could sense it still, phasing in and out of normal space, wounded but not defeated. It had been trapped aboard that vessel, and now it was loose. Free. And vastly more dangerous than it had been when confined to the hybrid ship. "Captain," Data reported, "the demonic entity is no longer reading on our sensors. It appears to have fully phased into subspace. However, I detect residual energy signatures consistent with the Ashmedai vessels that were separated during the initial engagement. They appear to be converging on the greater demon's last known position." Understanding crystallized in Clary's mind. The ancient demon had been leading them. Using the Romulan vessel as a way to gather power and resources. And now that it was free, it would gather its lesser demons and prepare for something far larger than a simple hybrid vessel attack. "Captain," Clary said quietly, "I think we just made a terrible mistake. We didn't defeat the Ashmedai. We freed their leader." Picard's expression hardened as the implications washed over him. They had won the immediate battle. But the war. The real war between the Federation and an enemy that had been hiding in the shadows for 300 years, had only just begun. The Enterprise D limped back to Starbase 515 with damaged shields and a hold full of rescued Romulan refugees. The immediate tactical situation had been contained, but the larger strategic picture had fractured into something far more complicated. In the secure briefing room deep within the starbase, Picard stood before a gathering of Starfleet admirals, Section 31 operatives, and Federation diplomatic representatives, explaining the impossible. The Ashmedai were not a threat that could be managed through conventional military strategy. They were a civilization, if one could call it that, operating on principles that defied Federation understanding. "The greater demon that we separated from the Romulan vessel," Data explained, his voice carrying the weight of conclusions no one wanted to hear, "appears to be a being of considerable age and power. Our analysis of the demonic energy signature suggests it has been feeding continuously for at least 400 years, consuming not just biological matter but what might be termed life force or essence. Each consumption has made it exponentially more powerful." "How powerful are we talking?" Admiral Sato demanded. "If our extrapolations are correct," Data replied, "the entity's current power output is approximately equivalent to a sustained warp core detonation. But unlike a starship's antimatter reaction, this entity can regenerate its energy reserves by feeding. It is essentially a perpetually renewable weapon." The briefing room fell into heavy silence. Clary stood at the back of the room, still wearing her tactical uniform from the raid, watching the reactions of Federation leadership as they grappled with a threat that existed outside their paradigm of rational conflict resolution. "What does it want?" Sato asked, directing the question toward Clary. "Power," Clary answered simply. "That's all demons really want, no matter how intelligent they are. In my world, the greater demons were essentially immortal, but they were also bound by laws, the Claves laws, treaties with other factions, the accords that governed interaction between Shadowhunters and Downworlders. Here, there are no such laws. Here, it can feed unchecked. Then we need to establish laws, one of the diplomatic representatives suggested. We need to reach out to these entities, establish protocols, create frameworks for peaceful coexistence. Clary turned to face the speaker directly, and her expression could have cut glass. You can't negotiate with a demon. It doesn't understand compromise. It doesn't value peace. It will tell you anything you want to hear to get closer to its prey, and the moment you lower your guard, it will consume you. That's not cynicism, that's 300 years of accumulated Shadowhunter experience talking. But the Romulan crew we rescued, another representative countered. They weren't demons. They were enslaved by the demon. Surely there's a distinction that matters. Of course there is, Clary agreed. But it doesn't change the fundamental nature of what we're dealing with. The demon used the Romulans because they had military capability and the ambition to pursue power. But it would have consumed them eventually, once their usefulness expired. That's what beings of pure hunger do. Picard intervened before the argument could escalate further. The question before us is not whether we can negotiate with the Ashmedai. The question is whether we can survive their presence in Federation space. Clary, based on your experience, what would a greater demon do now that it's been separated from the hybrid vessel? Clary moved to the holographic display and activated a three-dimensional map of Federation space. It will gather its forces. The lesser demons, the Ashmedai operatives we've already identified, will converge on its location. It will establish a new base of operations, probably somewhere that gives it access to high-population worlds for feeding. And it will begin expanding its network, recruiting other factions if possible, conquering them if necessary. How long? Sato asked. Days, maybe weeks, Clary said. The greater demons are old and patient, but they're also voracious. It's been feeding on the war, on the violence and fear of the conflict with the Enterprise. That taste will make it hungry for more. It won't wait long before making its next move. The briefing dissolved into a cascade of urgent communications. Starfleet sending alerts to all vessels, Section 31 activating covert intelligence networks, the Federation Council convening emergency sessions. Picard and Clary found themselves swept up in the machinery of a civilization preparing for conflict with an enemy it didn't yet understand. It was during one of the late-night strategy sessions, 3 days after the hybrid vessel engagement, that Chen finally had news about the technological interface he had been developing. It's ready, he said without preamble, pulling up holographic schematics in Picard's ready room. Or at least, ready enough. We've compressed the design specifications and accelerated the manufacturing timeline. We can have the device installed in 72 hours. What does it do, precisely? Picard asked. It interfaces with her demonic biology, Chen explained. Acts as a technological bridge, allowing her to consciously access the dimensional sensing capabilities that her marks previously provided. It won't give her the full power of a Shadowhunter's arsenal, but it will give her the ability to sense demonic presence, track dimensional anomalies, and potentially even interact with phased entities. At what cost? Crusher asked, voicing the concern they all felt. Some pain during integration, Chen said. Significant risk of rejection. Her body might treat it as a foreign object and attempt to expel it. And if the device malfunctions or becomes damaged, we don't have the knowledge to repair it. She'd be dependent on maintaining the systems herself. Clary listened to this discussion with the detachment of someone who had already accepted the cost of survival. Do it, she said. When can you start? Now, if you're willing, Chen replied. The integration process took 48 hours. The device, a small crystalline matrix that Chen had modeled on a combination of Federation technology and the principles of Shadowhunter runes, was surgically installed at the base of Clary's spinal column. The neural interfaces required calibration, and there were moments when the pain was so intense that she found herself questioning her own commitment to survival. But as the device came online, something shifted. It wasn't the same as having her marks. The sensation was cooler, more clinical, less instinctive. But it was functional. More than functional, it was powerful. She could sense the dimensional barriers now, could feel the subtle weaknesses in normal spacetime where demons had passed through. And most importantly, she could sense the greater demon. Even from light years away, she could feel its presence like a predator's presence in the darkness, vast and ancient and hungry. "It's moving," she told Picard as she recovered in sickbay, the newly installed device pulsing gently at the base of her skull. "Toward the Caleb sector. There are multiple lesser demons converging on that location. Whatever it's planning, it's going to happen there." Picard made the decision instantly. The Enterprise D broke orbit from Starbase 515, racing toward the Caleb sector at maximum warp. Behind them came additional star ships, the USS Sutherland, the USS Yorktown, a full flotilla of Federation vessels responding to the threat that had been hiding in their space for 300 years. When they arrived at the coordinates that Clary's device had indicated, they found something unexpected, a massive dimensional rift, hundreds of kilometers across, phasing in and out of normal spacetime. And within that rift, barely visible to conventional sensors, was the greater demon's true form. It was not the size of a starship or a creature of conventional biology. It was something that transcended normal spatial dimensions, a being of pure energy, vast and terrible, with components that existed in multiple planes of reality simultaneously. The lesser demons, the Ashmedai operatives, were arrayed around it like loyal soldiers, their vessels forming a protective perimeter around the dimensional rift. "My God," Worf whispered. "What are we looking at?" "A gateway," Clary said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was sensing. "The greater demon isn't just trying to establish a presence in Federation space. It's trying to open a permanent door between dimensions. If that rift stabilizes, it won't just be one greater demon and a handful of lesser demons. It will be an invasion. Hundreds of thousands of demonic entities, pouring through into our universe. How do we close it?" Picard demanded. Clary closed her eyes, reaching out with the technological interface, trying to understand the mechanics of what the demon was attempting. The principles were demonic, but the methodology was strange. It was using Federation technology, Romulan technology, and something else. Something older. The junction points, Clary realized. Like on the hybrid vessel, but on a cosmic scale. The demon is using Federation and Romulan systems as anchors, creating multiple junction points that hold the dimensional rift open. If we can destroy all of them simultaneously, we can collapse the rift. "How many junction points?" Sato asked over the secure comm. 7, Clary said. "Distributed across the Ashmedai fleet formation. They're protected by the lesser demon's vessels and the dimensional phasing. We'd need coordinated strikes against all 7 simultaneously, or the demon will compensate by moving the anchor points to new locations." Picard turned to face his assembled officers. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll divide our forces into 7 strike teams. Each team will target one junction point. Worf, coordinate with the other starship captains. I want tactical precision and overwhelming force." The battle that followed was unlike any engagement in Federation history. The Ashmedai vessels attacked with the knowledge that this was their final stand, unleashing their full capabilities against the Federation flotilla. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting an enemy that had finally learned how to counter their dimensional phasing tactics. Clary led one of the strike teams personally, piloting a fighter vessel toward the primary junction point while the Enterprise D and other capital ships engaged the main Ashmedai formation. As she flew, she could feel the greater demon's presence like a weight against her consciousness, trying to corrupt her, trying to use her half-demon heritage to turn her against her allies. But she had spent her entire life resisting demonic corruption. She had survived the loss of her marks, the loss of her identity, the loss of everything that made her who she had been. A single greater demon, no matter how ancient or powerful, was not going to break her now. The junction point was located within the largest Ashmedai vessel, a structure of crystalline infernal matter that pulsed with the combined power of centuries of feeding. Clary's fighter punched through the vessel's shields and plunged into its interior, weapons blazing. As the junction point detonated, 7 explosions occurred simultaneously across the Ashmedai fleet formation. The dimensional rift destabilized catastrophically. The greater demons scream. That same terrible sound of rage and anguish echoed across subspace as it was torn away from its anchor points, pulled back toward its native dimension by forces it could not resist. The lesser demons attempted to flee, but they had nowhere to go. The Federation's coordinated assault was relentless, and without the protection of the greater being, they were vulnerable. The Ashmedai vessels began to fall, destroyed or driven into full-dimensional phasing where Federation weapons could no longer track them. When the dust cleared, the dimensional rift had collapsed. The greater demon was gone, banished back to its own dimension, its attempt to invade Federation space ended. The immediate threat was contained. But as Picard surveyed the battlefield from the bridge of the Enterprise D, he understood that this was not the end of the conflict, merely the conclusion of its first chapter. There would be other demons. Other attempts at invasion. Other battles in a war that had been raging in the shadows for centuries and was only now coming into the light. He turned to look at Clary, who stood at the secondary tactical station, the technological interface at the base of her skull glowing faintly with residual energy. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Clary met his gaze, and Picard saw in her eyes the synthesis of everything she had become, no longer a Shadowhunter of the old world, no longer bound by the Clave's ancient laws, but something new. A warrior adapted to a universe of science and reason, carrying the knowledge of a world that shouldn't exist, serving a Federation that had learned to see the shadows. "Now," Clary said, "we prepare. Because there will be more. There are always more demons. But this time, the Federation won't face them in ignorance." Conclusion. Clary Fairchild had arrived in the 24th century as a refugee from an impossible dimension, her marks burned out and her identity shattered. She had expected to find a universe of pure science and logic, a place where the supernatural had no purchase and magic was dismissed as superstition. Instead, she had discovered that the Federation's strength lay not in denying the impossible, but in adapting to it. The Ashmedai conflict changed everything. Starfleet Command established a new division, the Dimensional Anomaly Response Team, with Clary as its director. Section 31 was brought partially into compliance with Federation oversight, its intelligence operations on demonic entities now shared with the broader military structure. The Romulan survivors of the hybrid vessel were integrated into Federation diplomatic channels, and a careful détente was established with the Romulan Star Empire regarding their shared vulnerability to extradimensional threats. But more importantly, the Federation learned a fundamental lesson: there were forces in the universe that transcended their categories of understanding. There were beings that couldn't be reasoned with through conventional diplomacy, threats that required not just military response but genuine understanding of alien psychology and motivation. Clary became the bridge between these worlds. The technological interface at the base of her spine had given her a new form of power, not as devastating as her lost marks, but more versatile, more adaptable to Federation principles. She worked with Chen on refining the device, helping other potential operators understand how to sense dimensional anomalies. She consulted with Picard on tactical matters involving threats that science couldn't yet explain. And she trained a new generation of Federation officers to recognize demonic presence, to understand the signs that indicated a breach between realities. There were setbacks. Smaller Ashmedai operatives continued to operate in Federation space, and it took months of careful hunting to track and contain them. The Romulans, despite their agreement to work with the Federation on dimensional threats, pursued their own secret research into how demonic power could be weaponized. And the Federation Council remained divided on how much resource should be devoted to fighting an enemy that most citizens still didn't believe existed. But gradually, the paradigm shifted. The Shadowhunters world and the Star Trek universe had collided, and the result was not the destruction of either, but the transformation of both. The Federation was forced to acknowledge that there were more things in existence than their science had yet categorized. And Clary was forced to accept that her purpose had evolved beyond the simple binary of hunting demons. She was no longer a shadow hunter, bound by the Clave's ancient laws and the weight of traditions established centuries before she was born. She was something new, something that existed in the space between magic and science, between the supernatural and the rational, between the world she had lost and the universe she had come to understand. She was a warrior adapted to serve a civilization that valued both logic and the acknowledgement of mystery. She was a bridge builder in a galaxy that was only beginning to understand how much it needed to be rebuilt. And as she stood on the bridge of the Enterprise D, watching the stars stream past at warp speed, Clary Fairchild understood something profound. Sometimes the greatest strength lies not in the power you were born with, but in the wisdom to adapt when that power is stripped away. The Shadowhunters had taught her to hunt. The Federation had taught her to think. And together, they had given her the tools to become something neither world could have created alone, a warrior of science and instinct, bound by honor but not constrained by dogma, ready to face threats that existed in the spaces between worlds. The future remained uncertain. There would be more demons, more conflicts, more moments when the Federation's faith in diplomacy would be tested against beings that understood only hunger and power. But for the first time since arriving in this impossible future, Clary Fairchild felt something more than loss. She felt purpose. She felt belonging. And she felt the quiet determination that comes from knowing exactly who you are, even when everything you were has been burned away and rebuilt into something entirely new. Live long and prosper. More stories await.